All right. I am here with Blake Withers, who I've been following on social media for some time now and has really, really high quality posts, and is also the co-host of the Sports Medicine Project, a very great podcast. I was actually listening to your episode with Greg Lehman once, which I
Oh,
think is
yes.
always a good episode to draw in some people. And as always, it's a really good conversation that you had with him. So kudos to you with that one. Blake, can you introduce yourself and just tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do professionally?
Yes, mate. Thank you for the introduction. Just on that episode with Greg, it was so funny because he was saying, he's like, yeah, I'm talking to you guys and you have a podcast and I have a podcast. It's like podcastception. And now I'm talking to you with like all these different podcasts intertwining. So it feels very similar, just good. My name is Blake, as you said. I am over in Australia, about halfway down on the east coast at a place called Newcastle, which is about an hour and a half north of Sydney. So I'm predominantly a musculoskeletal podiatrist, and I put emphasis on the musculoskeletal because you may have heard of podiatry in general, you may have heard of sports podiatry, but I kind of sit somewhere in the middle where I see lots of different people from all walks of life. I'm not dealing with the elite athlete only. I'm dealing with the person with Achilles tendinopathy, the 65-year-old lady with adult acquired flat foot, or the young kid with severs, or, an elite A-League, which is our top soccer, person with heel pain. So seeing lots of different people. So that's what I do predominantly, patient facing, seeing them in the clinic. I do some online consults, mainly for runners and people with stress fractures all over the world. And then I lecture and teach in biomechanics at the Newcastle University. So I teach around foot orthotics, rehab, musculoskeletal podiatry, imaging, but predominantly in biomechanics. I do a bit of research on the side. I have the podcast, as you mentioned, the Sports Medicine Project. I have a little education platform. I do some teaching around Australia and over the world. And I really just like feet, and I'm really passionate about feet and really passionate about podiatry because we're a smaller field. You may not have heard of a podiatrist or a musculoskeletal podiatrist, but it's awesome to jump on podcasts on this and kind of move the profession forward a little bit and help people understand what we do.
So why did you end up going down that route towards podiatry instead of something like physiotherapy or some other profession in the rehab space?
Yes. Now, I'm allowed to make this joke because my partner, who is also my podcast host, is a physiotherapist. But I say, physio's a podiatrist that couldn't get in or weren't smart enough as a joke. But I get asked this question so much. I would think maybe 3-4 times a day, I'm sitting with a patient and they just look at me and go, I need to know, why did you choose feet? Feet are the worst. And I go, yeah, I get that question a lot. What I like about them is the hyper speciality of dealing with below the knee, and it's not just the foot and the ankle, predominantly below the knee for myself, shin splints, tibial bone stress. I love the idea of just seeing all the pathologies within that one area. And as an example, so my partner might come home, and one of the reasons we started the podcast is we talk about cases at dinner, but she might see 2 shoulders, a hip, a back, an Achilles, and a foot. Whereas for someone like myself, there's some days I might see 10 Achilles tendinopathy patients or 5 navicular bone stresses or 15 times. One day I saw plantar fasciitis 15 times. I just saw it a whole day. So
Wow.
yeah, what I like about that is you become, without sounding too egotistical, you become somewhat of the expert because you see it so much. You see every different version of this condition. You see every different version of it with different patients. And I like that because then I can really become somewhat of the specialist. So someone sees a navicular bone stress injury. Someone might see that once a year. Like, my colleagues, my physio colleagues might see it once a year. For me, I might see that 6 times a week. So you become quite the specialist, and then people look for that. And also you can teach and educate about that. So that's one of the things I really, really enjoy. Want to be clear, don't have a foot fetish, which is what everyone always says.
I wasn't going to say it.
We're all thinking of this. Okay, I just had to get that one out there.
Yeah, I mean, at least one time in the podcast, we had to get it off the table. So I find it really interesting, and I sort of debate myself about this, but you had Greg Lehman on recently, right? And he always speaks about how with many different conditions, the principles are often the same, right? We calm shit down, build shit back up, to quote him. A lot of the time that could apply.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned there's potentially like hundreds of diagnoses that we could have just below the knee. right? In the foot and
definitely.
ankle and the shin region. So do you find that the diagnosis is super important for you? And do you find that it creates different treatment plans, or is the principle generally the same, where you calm shit down, you build shit back up?
Yeah, it's a great question because we've had Greg on the podcast, and we all, probably you included, we all share very similar principles, and I very much live by that principle. But I guess on the kind of surface level, it makes sense. But going a little bit deeper, of course, there's some red flags that, of course, we can't miss. An example, someone with shin pain, can we just call it shin pain in a runner and let's build you back up? Well, some cases we can if it's shin splints or MTSS. Some cases we can't if it's a posterior medial tibial bone stress. And some cases we really can't when it's an anterior tibial stress fracture. So, I mean, those cases live all throughout the body where it really does matter. And of course, the patient coming to see us, if they're more diagnostically minded and they really do want a diagnosis to move forward, sometimes then it matters a little bit more. But in principle, in general, a lot of the time we can use that to say this tissue is irritated. We understand the loads that aggravate it. And a lot of the time, the loads are very, very similar. I mean, if you're talking about the Achilles tendon, the principles are going to be pretty similar for the tibialis posterior tendon, the flexor hallucis longus, and the peroneal tendon. They're all plantar flexors to some degree. I'm going to look to modify the plantar flexor load, slowly build that back in with rehab, or dose them with their meaningful activity. So a lot of the time it is very similar. And I like to joke and say, I've got it pretty easy as a podiatrist because below the knee, a lot of the time you're just trying to modify the plantar flexor load because that has a great correlation to loading through the foot. So calm the plantar flexor load back down and then kind of build it back up. So yeah, I agree.
Cool. Okay. And I guess there's lots of different ways to do that. And one potential way will be with orthotics, right? And I think orthotics is an area where there is a lot of misinformation and a lot of misunderstanding about what it is that they do. Some people say that they realign your body so that you're moving a little bit more symmetrically. There's a lot of talk about how you have to have the perfect orthotic to really support your specific foot structure. So can you break down some of the myths around orthotics? What do they not do?
Yeah, the foot orthotic debate. I mean, this is the question that I get asked the most. I mean, even patients coming to see me, at least once a day, a patient will tell me, at the end of the consult, say, great, do you have any questions? And at least once a day, someone will say, no, I'm all good. I was surprised you didn't give me a foot orthotic. And they've got like an Achilles tendinopathy or something like that. I mean, there's something tied to podiatry. And getting to the myths, I wanted to go over as briefly as I could kind of the history of foot orthoses and foot biomechanics and where it's come from. And there's a lot of kind of opposing theories of what it's kind of started. But I wanted to ask you a question before we get into it. When do you think the first, in quotation marks, foot orthotic or something similar was made? When do you think, year-wise?
I mean, I'm thinking back to like ancient Chinese civilization when they used to like put them in like the tiny little shoes that used to change the shape of their foot. Man. So I guess you gave me a hint there, not too far back. I'm going to say a few hundred years, maybe 300 years.
Okay, damn right. Now, it doesn't sound so impressive. So it's 1888 is the first kind of documented, scribe or drawing, you could say. And get this, it was made out of brass arch support. So it contoured in through the arch, and it came about 1 centimeter below the medial malleoli. So you can imagine a piece of metal, basically. My God. Could you imagine how uncomfortable that would have been? I mean, if you've got arch pain, it'll take that away because everywhere else in your body is probably going to be sore trying to walk around on that. So that's where we started. Now, from that, there was a really famous, I think he was a podiatrist, but a really famous guy named Merton Root. And the big one that you may have even learned of this in physical therapy school around root theory and kind of biomechanical theory. But to briefly align what happened, himself and some colleagues come together and they design this kind of classification system of what the foot should do. And we call this the subtalar joint neutral kind of position or theory. So the model is the foot looks and should be neutral. The subtalar joint should work around this kind of neutral model. And then when we think about our foot orthoses or our foot orthotics, they should aim to try and make that be the case all the time. So if you have pain, it's because your foot wasn't in neutral. If you're still having pain, it's because we didn't correct it enough. And the idea was you make it function in a neutral position, you prevent compensatory or abnormal positions, whatever that means, and you lock the mid-tarsal joint. And as long as the foot orthotic does that, you're sweet. If you had pain for 10 years, doesn't matter. We'll lock that midfoot and you'll be running in 2 days. So there's obviously some problems with that, but they went on to do a study looking at 140 people, 100 of them were symptom-free, and they had a look at their foot and said, okay, how do we look to classify this foot as abnormal? Now, you'll maybe get a bit of a kick out of this. What was abnormal was if you had a rear foot varus, a plantar flex first ray, a dorsiflex first ray, a forefoot valgus, a forefoot varus. So things that are completely normal that we see on everyone's foot all the time, on asymptomatic and symptomatic people, but they called them deformities. So they then said, right, let's get all these people together and let's have a look and see how many people had 0 deformities, how many people had 1, how many people had 2, all the way up to 5. How many people, I'm going to ask you another question, how many people do you think had no deformities at all from their classification?
I'm going to guess 0 or 0. A very, very small percentage.
0. So no one had no deformities. Most people had between 3 to 5. Funnily enough, they look at people walk and move. The way that their foot was non-weight bearing didn't have a great correlation to actually how it functioned. And still remember, 100 of these people are pain-free, so they don't have any trouble. There's been some other studies looking at how many people have these deformities, and upwards of 92% of the average foot will have them. So when we look at that, then it makes sense how we come to this idea around correcting the foot to this normal position. And that's kind of where this neutral idea came from. And you'll go out to the store and you'll buy a pair of arch support or supportive thongs from even the chemist, and there's a picture of a foot rolling in and rolling out, and there's the material on either side trying to bring it back to this neutral or vertical calcaneus. So that's where we got to, and that's where it's kind of stemmed from, and that's where some people still are. And of course, the thing that we will definitely agree on, you can come in with this foot posture and I can correct you and tell you that I'm correcting your foot and it's because of your deformity. And of course, you can still get better and still improve. It's probably just not in the way that we think that it's happening. So that hopefully sheds a little bit of light of where that's come from.
Yeah, and I think the fact that people can improve, even though your theory may be incorrect, for the people that propose that theory, that you're getting better because we're realigning your foot, those people may feel like their hypothesis is confirmed when they see someone get better. But just because someone got better doesn't necessarily mean you know why. And I love what Eric Meira says about this, where he says, if something happens in research or science or in the clinic, ask yourself if you could explain why that happened 10 other different ways. And I love that. So
that's so good.
So how can we explain why people get better after you give them foot orthoses?
Oh God, another good question, and one I don't have the answer to. I guess where we kind of are currently in 2025, and I spend my nights alone reading foot orthoses research papers, which sounds horribly sad, but I enjoy it, so it's okay. Where we kind of are is we think of, there's a couple of different potential theories. There's the kinematic theory, so we can know kinematics, movement we can see, knee flexion, lumbar flexion, that kind of thing. We have kinetics, movement we can't see, internal joint forces, plantar pressure, tensile loads, that type of thing. We have the neuromodulation centrally driven. Whenever we apply a stimulus to the body, there's going to be something happening more centrally, kind of brain and spinal cord. Then also the contextual effects, where a great colleague of mine, Ian Griffiths, is doing some research. And that's the whole idea around, going to see someone, giving them an intervention that they've got in their hand, they pay for, can have an effect on their pain. So it seems to be one of those theories, one of those modalities, or a combination of all of them. And where we probably were 10, 15 years ago was the kinematic theory, where your foot rolls in, I stick something underneath, now your foot doesn't roll in, and that's why you're better. And again, when we look to the research, which is always surprising when I tell people this, we've done some pretty cool research, because it's a bit easier to do the kinematic research, because you have a little bit of you get some fancy equipment in the lab, you get someone to do something, you intervene, and then you watch them do it again and see if it changes. But what we found is, when we thought we were adding this, and I say correction with a lot of nuance, but let's let's just say material or something underneath the foot. If I have a 5 or a 10 degree correction per se, so I have a bit of material and it's on a 5 mil slant underneath the calcaneus or the back of the foot, when we actually measured what was happening, it was only around 1 or 2 or 3 degrees, but people still improved. So we think that we're really doing this correction and we're applying all this force and we're really influencing the position of the foot when it's probably not actually happening that much from what we can see. But then on the kinetic level, internally within the joint and within the tissues, we're probably having more of an influence, plus the neuromodulation stuff and, of course, the contextual factors. So I think where we are at the moment is probably influencing joint position, internal joint loads, potentially changing some of the muscle and tendon forces, but a combination of all those, which is a really roundabout answer to say, we don't really know. And when we teach about this, it's so funny because when we teach the students of, well, how do you make a custom foot orthotic? You talk to some of the smartest people on earth when it comes to foot orthotic research, and they say, well, we're probably at the point now where we just stick something underneath. If it's comfortable, awesome. If not, we'll bring it down a little bit and find that point. And that's kind of where we are. And although we try to be very specific, and we are with our prescriptions, it's probably not happening in the way that we think. And that's the same everywhere else on the body, with back pain, knee pain, that type of thing.
Yeah, when I asked what the specific mechanism was, I knew you probably wouldn't have the exact answer, but I just wanted to ask it just to highlight how complicated all of this is. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that because the foot orthoses doesn't correct foot posture that it can't be helpful, right? And you outlined so many possible reasons there on why they could be helpful. So yeah. Just to clarify, when it comes to changing the kinetic variables, so changing how much certain structures are being loaded and how much force is being applied through different areas, is that correcting proper kinetic variables, or is it more so temporarily offloading it just so that the tissues can relax?
Yeah, it's a good one, because when we talk about the correction and I guess the average, you use the example of, a golfer, and I've heard this lovely quote from Ian Griffiths. If you're talking to a golfer and they say, I hit the ball and I drove it 120 yards, you go, great, is that right? Oh, well, 120 yards, is it too far? Is it too less? Like we don't have a variation. We don't have a normal per se of what we're trying to correct it to. So when we're thinking of what we're modifying and changing, it's probably, as we said, one, if not all of the above. An easier way to think about, I guess, to conceptualize, let's say, and I'll use a bit of research here. If we look at the plantar fascia, a really common condition that we all see, more of the medial tensile-driven plantar fascia. So plantar fascia being, running from the medial calc up to the base, or that medial band. We have some cool research on when we have the foot at the start of mid-stance, the distance between the calcaneus and the first metatarsal, let's just call that 1. When we load the foot, it will expand around 10%. So the distance will increase. So the assumption is we're going to have more tensile strain on that plantar fascia as we move over through mid-stance. So the theory of, if we use a foot orthosis, if we use an arch contouring foot orthotic that's relatively stiff and comfortable, we may be able to reduce the deformation of the arch, and we might be able to reduce how much that distance increases. And what that would then in turn do, it will reduce the tensile strain on the plantar fascia. And it's the exact same proposed mechanism as how someone with a mid-portion Achilles tendinopathy, we put them in a heel lift, it reduces the amount of ankle dorsiflexion that they have. That in turn reduces the compressive load on the mid-portion, or even the compressive load on the insertion. And that generally can make people feel better, similar to a high drop shoe. So if we can get our biomechanical hats on, that's kind of the way that we're thinking about it. And we have some really cool research in the diabetic foot ulcer world when we're looking at plantar pressures and wound healing. So if we look at, say, a diabetic foot ulcer under the second metatarsal, and I wish we could say this with the musculoskeletal conditions that we see, but we can't yet. But we can measure on a pressure plate, we can measure how much pressure someone puts on there, and we can measure how much time they put that pressure there. So we call that the time integral, and the kind of plantar pressure, which is measured in kilopascal. So I can't remember the exact number, but it's something like, if it's over 230 kilopascals of force and someone has a diabetic ulcer, they won't actually be able to heal the ulcer. It's too much pressure. The skin can't proliferate. Now, I wish we could say that for, say, a second met capsulitis or a neuroma or a neuritis or something like that, to say, yep, we just bring the pressure here and you're going to get better. That you ask people and you talk to people about when they have pain in their forefoot and they say, yeah, it feels like a pebble. I feel it when I really push off. And we think, well, that plantar pressure is obviously that compressive load is irritable on that spot. So I put my biomechanical hat on and I think, how can I reduce that? Well, I want to reduce how much time they spend on there, and I want to reduce how much compression they have there. So I think when they're pushing off, if I increase the force around it with some material, that's going to reduce the force on top. And if I reduce the force behind it with a simple metatarsal bar or metatarsal dome, that is going to reduce the force there because it's going to increase the force behind it. So I'm going to change the overall kilopascals or force. And if I add in a rocket shoe, that's also going to reduce how much time they spend there. So essentially we're not pushing as hard, or the ground's not pushing as hard, and it's not pushing as hard for as long. And the assumption is that, of course, that is going to allow that tissue to heal and recover and help that person's pain, and we can move forward.
I thought we just needed to get everybody in a barefoot shoe.
Oh, the barefoot shoe. Those guys on social media, and like this example, I'm still yet to have an answer for this. The example of that and I want to use this analogy, and tell me what you think, because I've been practicing this in the mirror every night for the last couple of months. So you're the first person to hear it. So the way the principle or philosophy that I think of foot orthoses, and I explain this with all the patients that I see. As you can see, I do like to yap, and I think to my detriment with some patients. But for the majority of cases that I see with foot orthoses, and I use them quite a lot, I will use them and explain to them to patients, just like Panadol for a headache. When you have a sore foot, you may have some plantar heel pain that's been going on for some time. Maybe your forefoot's been a bit sore, your arch has been a bit sore. With some good progressive loading and load modification and shoes and taping and progression back to your meaningful activity and an offloading device like a foot orthotic, we should be able to calm that discomfort down and essentially take the headache away. And once that's gone, you don't continue to take headache preventative, and you don't continue to take it because you don't have any symptoms. And that's how we use the foot orthotic. We take it away, you do get back to things as normal, you don't need to see me anymore, you use it as much as you need. The other case that I tend to see, and this is kind of in the middle, we think of it a little bit like type 2 diabetes or blood pressure medication. And we all would see cases of people with blood pressure. We know in some cases, and we've all seen patients who have either reversed the effects of those chronic conditions through good lifestyle modification, healthy eating, physical activity, and other things. But we know that's incredibly difficult for people to do. And it takes a long time to form the habit change. It takes a long time to potentially reverse what is happening with blood pressure or type 2 diabetes, but it's not impossible. Now, I see cases in the clinic where this person has got a lot of things going on in their life. They've probably got some changes to their tissue physiology, and they probably could build the capacity in their tissue, but it's going to take a long time, and it's going to take away from other things in their life. And the classic example is, I saw someone this morning that wants to run a half marathon in 6 weeks, and they just have a little bit of a cranky heel, typical compressive plantar heel pain. Now, they also work as a nurse, and they need to spend a lot of time on their feet. So they're getting some discomfort through the end of the day, and they're also trying to get out and run. I said, well, listen, there's a couple of options. We can unload the heel, get it a bit nicer on your foot, get it a bit more comfortable and dampen the forces around the heel. And then we get to the half marathon. We manage as best we can. And then we see how we go after that. That person could probably get through without a foot orthotic, but they might be in more discomfort. They might not be able to run as much. Can they build that strength? It's a bit different because it's more of a heel bruise. The loads are a little bit different. And I need to be, as a good practitioner, I need to explain both options to them and say, what do you feel is best for you? And the majority of cases, people say, I understand I don't need it forever. I just want my pain to feel a little bit better. And they use it. And I think where some of the online people fall down is, I know they're not seeing these patients, because when we're presenting this to these cases, the people are like, of course I want to make it feel a little bit better. I want to feel a little bit more comfortable, and I want to take some pressure away from the tissue. Now, the third case that is probably less common for people other than, I guess myself, because I see, runners, I see team sports, and I do see some third-party work cover complex cases where, people are relying on braces and foot orthotics just to be able to go out for a walk for 20 minutes. So those cases, it's a little bit more like type 1 diabetes, where there's a physiological change there, and it's very, very difficult for those people to build that back, despite all their good habits and trying how they can at a person. My last case actually today was a young lady that's had a couple of meniscus surgeries, and very, very young, late 20s, and now lateral knee compartment, very thin joint space, not a lot of cartilage, kind of grade 4 osteoarthritis, and a CrossFit athlete. Now, that person gets some relief in an orthotic that's wedged on the outside to try and wedged on the inside to try and unload that lateral compartment. Now, if that's going to give her 10% more improvement in her quality of life, who am I to say that you should not be in this foot orthotic because it's going to potentially have all these harmful effects? Or the person that's just had their midfoot fused and they're a builder and they need to be on their feet, they may rely on something that's stiff and rigid with a shoe and a brace. And what really frustrates me is I know that the people that say this online, and we can think of a couple of different examples quite easily, I know that these people aren't seeing these cases, because as soon as you were to tell someone that, as soon as they took these supports away, their quality of life would diminish. They can't go out and walk. They can't play with their kids. They had these real chronic concerns and real deformities where they've got joints fused and they've had a car accident or fell down the stairs, and the orthotic and these things that we're using make such meaningful change for them. So it boggles my mind where people get told generally, get out of them as quick as you can. I'm like, I know you're not seeing these cases because that is just so harmful for those people. So they're kind of the three groups that I would see, if that makes a bit of sense.
It does. Yeah. And frankly, I wasn't so outspoken, and so I didn't have such a strong opinion about it, but I used to be more on the side against orthotics because I was one to think, like, they're not magic, they're not fixing anything, and people may have these maladaptive beliefs about it. But as you mentioned, that person who takes the orthotic out and their quality of life greatly diminishes, I think it's very different to say that orthotics are incredible, most people should have them, and we need to have everyone have a neutral foot, versus saying that some individuals greatly benefit from them. And when we look at research, a lot of the time we're looking at averages. And some people may not respond well to certain interventions. Some people may respond having sort of like an average, typical response. And some people may have a lot of success with certain interventions, right? And it sounds like because you see so many people, you see some people that maybe don't do well with orthotics and some people that have a great benefit with them.
Yeah, I was similar to you. It's funny for me to say, because I'm a podiatrist, I went through that stage. When I graduated, because I love movement optimist, and I was like, foot orthotics, no way, I'll just strengthen the hell out of this thing. You'll get strong, can't go wrong getting strong. And then, you actually start to communicate with people and you realize that you have shared decision making. And I have some people on my list that I've done absolutely everything that I possibly can, and they've done absolutely everything that they can, and they just feel better with a simple, off-the-shelf, $100 orthotic that I've modified in my clinic with a little bit of extra cushion. And they're like, I just like it on my heel when I'm at work. I just wear it in my work shoes. I stand 10 hours a day. Is that harmful? And I'm like, of course not. You see me once every couple of years or once a year. I recover it. These are the costs of it. Are you okay with that? And a lot of people are like, yeah, I mean, they're like running or training or doing CrossFit or going to the gym. And one of the myths that I wanted to talk about with you is the whole idea of this foot orthosis making feet weaker, because I don't know what studies people are reading, because I'm not aware of anything that's conclusive. What we currently have is there's 5 studies in total, and I'm only going to talk about 3 of them, but we've just got varying results. So a lot of the time, 2 of the studies, the one from Mayo 2007 and the Perry study, which I think is 2012, are probably my 2 favorite. But basically, we give foot orthotics to people with asymptomatic flat feet, and we see what happens. One study, the abductor hallucis muscle increases in its size and gets thicker, and so does the flexor hallucis brevis. So foot orthotics make your feet bigger. I could tell people that it happens if I just use that study. The study from Perry, the flexor hallucis brevis and the adductor digiti minimi and adductor hallucis decreased in their size. One was at 8 weeks, one from 12 weeks. The Mayer's 2007 study, they had people with Achilles tendinopathy. They saw them at the start, saw them 4 weeks later, and their plantar flexor torque had increased. So there's just lots of variation. And one of my favorite ones is, it just shocks me about research, but they took this group of kids. I think they were between 9 and 12. How many was there? Anyway, they were playing soccer. Maybe there was 100 or 120. Anyway, they randomized them into two groups. One group, they didn't get an arch support. What they got was this measly, thinnest piece of felt underneath their arch, and it's strapped around their arch. And it was relatively thick, I guess, in the arch. So in theory, an arch support. So just strapped around the arch, and they wore that for 9 weeks. Compared that to the group that didn't wear them randomized. The group that wore that little measly arch suspender, on average, 7 to 9% increase in cross-sectional area of the adductor hallucis compared to the other group. So I just don't know where people are basing this stuff off. And you think of, if you're able to wear a foot orthotic and you can do more in your life because your pain's a little bit more manageable or a little bit less, that's going to be far better for your tissues. We know the tissues are dumb. They just need stimulus, mechanotherapy, as we like to call it. If you can go around and walk more and move more, that's going to be better for making your tissues a bit stronger.
Do you think there's an aspect about this increase in muscle cross-sectional area that's due to offloading certain tissues and placing more stress on others? Because I sort of think about the running world and different forms for running. And sometimes if people are dealing with, let's say, an Achilles pain and they're a forefoot striker, we may say, why don't you try heel striking to help offload the Achilles a little bit more, right? But that doesn't come without a cost. You're now loading other structures more. Can we think about that in the same way with orthotics and potentially getting other areas stronger?
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, for some reason, we've kind of moved what they are into this weird classification system that even I don't understand, where everybody else, every other health professional on earth talks about load modification and using these load modifiers, and foot orthoses fit under that. Like, that's all I'm trying to do with my patients. Like, they come in and say, hey, I'm in pain. This tissue hurts. What can I do? And we look at obviously all the things that we can do through a psychosocial lens. We talk about what's happening to them, help them make sense of their pain. But they have pain when they push off through their second metatarsal toe. I can take some pressure off so you feel more comfortable. All I am doing is I'm just moving the load and the stress away. How it's happening, I can't really explain to you that well, and it's not that important for you as a patient to understand, but I know what's happening, and I've got the best guide on earth. I've got the patient right in front of me, and I just get them to do a heel raise or say, how do you feel now when you walk? And they say, it feels a little bit better. I go, great. Let's do all the other things as well as getting this load modifier comfortable. And I actually went through a period in my career where for a year, I never said the word foot orthoses. I just called them a load modifier because that's all I wanted the patient to think they are. I'm like, you just need to know that I'm taking the stress away. And the idea, and I kind of say this line to people a little bit, I'm trying to build your internal resiliency. For a short period of time, we might lie on external force to remove some of that remove some of that stress. But the long-term goal for you and I working together is we're building that internal tissue resilience. And until we get to that point, we may use this load modifier to have you feel more comfortable. Once we get to that point, we might have a period of consolidation, and then we can figure out how much do we need it. And a lot of the time, it's not very much, because that myth, it's another one that frustrates me. I'm a pretty easily frustratable guy. I got a lot of people on mute on Instagram, just saying that out loud, because I do like some of their stuff, but other times I'm like, this is just not nuanced at all. But the myth that people just need to take them out straight away, like as soon as you become pain-free, we need to get you out of these things as much as possible, because these things are just going to be, they're basically killing you. Like, you need to get them out of your shoes right now. Like, the day that you wake up and your heel is manageable, throw those things, burn them, go call your podiatrist and say, I'm never coming back to see you again. I burned the orthotics and we had a great party. We use them more for some people, less for others. And we need to figure out how we're going to let that tissue adapt. Because as you said, if we're removing a foot orthotic, we're going to be taking some stress away from that. We're going to be increasing some of the stress on that tissue, and it might just flare back up again. And if someone's spending a lot of time on their feet, they're a runner training for a marathon, they're running 160 Ks a week, and their peroneal tendon sore, and you've got a wedge on the outside, there's real risk with taking that away. So we need to weigh up the consequences, have that nuanced conversation with the person, and you may over time bring the wedge down. I do that a lot with people, and I work with a lot of people that come to see me to come out of their foot orthotics, but it's just like anything, it's gradual, and we know there's probably some risk associated with it's gradual, and some people just feel better in them, and that's okay. It's okay to do that. They might just wear them in these shoes, they might wear them all the time. Some people might leave them in for a month or two because they feel a bit worried. We'll have that nuanced conversation, and then we'll get to that point. And I've seen cases where second opinions, and people have found me online where someone has maybe potentially bought a little bit more into the barefoot idea, and they come out of their foot orthotics and cushioned shoes and they just flared up their heel and they've gone back 5 steps. And it wasn't that they can never get to that. It just needs to be more gradual, and they need a little bit more of a period of consolidating it and building that tissue capacity.
There's so many questions that I want to ask you. But maybe we'll get to this later, because we have some questions that we actually prepared, and I don't want to throw you off guard too many times.
No, that's okay.
So you spoke about how it's essentially a load modifier, and I'm wondering if some load modifiers or some foot orthoses are better than others. And this is the whole debate between the over-the-counter foot orthotic versus a very custom-made one. And earlier in this podcast, you were saying how if you talk to some of the best foot orthoses researchers in the world, they'll say just get something comfortable under there. But also you sort of speak about how you're adding things to over-the-counter orthotics, sometimes you put foam in certain places. So what do you think? Can some people just do very well with an over-the-counter orthotic, or is custom usually the way to go?
Yeah, great question, man. I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight. I'm so pumped up. It's just, I love just talking about this topic because they're such good questions. My clinical practice has changed dramatically. So initially when I come out, it was custom or nothing. And there's some people that still believe it has to be custom. Now in my clinical practice, I probably prescribe maybe 80% off the counter. Now, I want to be clear, when I say off the counter, this is what I mean, a customized medical grade foot orthotic. So the clinic that I work in, I've got my clinic room, I've got a big massive gym next door where I do all my assessment and rehab. I have, and I say this to patients as well, hopefully it's a little bit funny and get a kick out of this, I just have a fancy arts and crafts station, and I have that facing the patient. So I have a grinder and a work desk within my room, and the patient sits there and basically watches me glue and grind. And as you can see, I do love to yap. I'm telling them what I'm doing, how it's happening, so they can see what I'm doing, because I don't want them to think, oh, it's just over the counter, because that's what you can get from the chemist. I'm customizing this to your foot and to your pathology. I'm marking up where you're maybe sore on the metatarsal head. I'm deflecting and putting the material there. I'm increasing the height of the arch. I'm making it a little bit stiffer. I'm building a big, nice, beautiful wedge on the outside to unload your peroneal tendon. I'm supporting the arch to unload your on your navicular. And this is probably where a little bit of the harm from foot orthotics comes from. If you put on a foot orthotic and it's uncomfortable, a patient may have paid a lot of money, and I'm sure maybe you've seen cases where people have come to you and said, these orthotics didn't work, they're really uncomfortable. And that's the big thing that we're trying to change, where I want patients to see what I'm doing, because then they know that I can change it and modify it. If someone says the arch is too high, I can change it in less than 20 seconds. I can make it lower, I can make it higher, I can make it wider, I can make it thinner right in front of me, and I can do it in real time. So for patients that we see, if they have any arch irritation, and it does happen, these irritations happen because it's hard to gauge how comfortable someone is, I can change that in real time. So that's really important for people to understand they're modifiable. So comparing those against a custom, we're trying to see, well, is there more of a clinical benefit, or I guess a clinical significance compared to a statistical significance? And where the research is, unfortunately, most of the studies, as 2 big systematic reviews, show there's not a vast difference between a custom foot orthotic and a prefabricated foot orthotic. Now, you can see the problems with the prefabricated one. The one that, let's say, a physio colleague might give. They might get an orthotic that they order online. It's medical grade, and they give that to a patient with some pain in their forefoot. Whereas if I give one to a patient with a forefoot, I'm putting on a valgus wedge, I'm putting on a soft cover, a deflection, a metatarsal dome. I'm doing all these features, which we know from the research clearly unloads that painful tissue. So that's kind of the big difference between them, where if you maybe look to the research or you talk to the patient and they don't understand, they go, yeah, I got the orthotic from the podiatrist, and I got the orthotic from the physio. They're exactly the same, but we know they're vastly different. And the same thing comes for the customizable ones. We can do absolutely anything now. So I do a bit of teaching around 3D printing and modeling of foot orthotics. So now we take a scan and we can do, I mean, it's amazing. It keeps me up at night what we can do to these foot orthotics now. Like, we can make parts of the orthotic a little bit thicker, less thick. We've got the material that they use in the marathon shoes, the PIBA foam and the ATPU. We can actually use that on top of the orthotic for someone with a compressive heel pain. So if you call it an arch support with a customizable foot orthotic, when you go to research that, if I was to make one versus 10 of my colleagues, we would probably all make something different. So it's very hard to be able to say, well, generally, does a custom foot orthotic outperform something else? And we do have some research on this. A colleague of mine, Fiona Hawke, she published this big systematic review, actually another one I was saying to the two before, and conditions like a painful pes cavus, which isn't a diagnosis, it just means a high arch foot, generally with pain on the outside of the foot. Custom foot orthotics had a significant impact on their pain and their quality of life. So it's not to say that these things don't work. It's just there's nuance around how we select the materials, the stiffness, and the modifications. And I actually, as a podiatrist, I carry around a foot orthotic on me at all times. If people are watching the video, I don't know if they use that, but I'm holding a foot orthotic, and you can see the arch is higher. And if you look on the outside, it's a little bit lower. So we would say that's about 18 mil from the bottom. Now, if someone has a cavus high arch foot and they put more pressure on the outside and they have a chronic perineal injury, obviously we need to provide some pronatory force to try and take some pressure off the tendon. If I use something like that, it's probably not going to be as effective as if I use a heel cup that's maybe 20 mil and the material is a lot stiffer and there's a big wedge on the outside. So I can customize the whole orthotic, which comes into where we understand our biomechanics to make it better for the person. And I say this to my podiatry colleagues, I don't know why physiotherapists have never done foot orthotics. Like, there's a study in the UK, I think it was only 20% of physiotherapists felt comfortable using foot orthotics. It works incredibly well for, say, patellofemoral pain. It's comparable sometimes to exercise in some studies. We did a podcast with Bradley O'Neill, and I think the intention to treat is like for every 4 patients with patellofemoral pain, if you give all 4 of them an orthotic, one of them will get better, which is quite a low number. So it's not that complex in the theory of just trying to unload a tissue when it comes to the custom and the medical grade, but it's a little bit more complex in understanding the prescription. And that's where, as podiatrists, we get quite frustrated with other professions because they go, oh, it's just an arch support, where there's so many different layers and nuance to it. Like, I had someone today with an arthritic big toe joint and they don't need an arch support. I put a carbon plate underneath their sole of their shoe, and that really reduced how much extension and internal joint torque they have for the first MPJ, where you might call that, an offloader or a load redistributor. But in that case, it's not about the foot orthotic. It's about trying to aim to reduce that tissue stress, and we can use different ways to do that.
You're saying, why don't physios do this? And I'm just hearing you speak and thinking about how complicated all of this is and how much learning I would have to do.
Well, the off-the-shelf ones you could easily, it still amazes me why, for a simple heel pain, a physiotherapist doesn't use a simple, soft, contoured medical grade foot orthotic and a heel lift, because they're generically made to aim to match the average of the foot. But when we look to the research on heel pain, a pretty simple foot orthotic performs just as well as a custom. So it makes them feel a little bit better. Like, obviously the grinding and the little bit more nuance around the changing, because if someone says that uncomfortable, you obviously don't have a grinder, in your clinic or in the back door, but a lot of the time people can tolerate it. And I think there should be more physios using that, because we don't need to see every foot and ankle patient. And I think it's a really good, easy treatment with not much risk. Worst case scenario, it doesn't do anything. Maybe it makes them worse for a little bit. You just take it out.
Right. Okay, so you mentioned plantar heel pain. What are some other conditions that physios should be aware of where an over-the-counter orthotic can typically work pretty well, and what type of orthotic should they be getting for these different conditions?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the plan eventually is to create some educational pieces for physios, because some of these conditions, I mean, what I like to tell people is you need to, I guess, kind of go simple and a bit more complex. If we can understand the load that is being placed upon the tissue and what the aggravating load is, we can get a better understanding of what conditions are going to be best suited. So let's say Achilles tendinopathy, again, easy example. What loads are going to aggravate an insertional Achilles? It's going to be tensile load and compressive load. So if I use a heel lift, I'm going to reduce the compression and I'm going to reduce the tensile load. So if I think and put my biomechanical hat on, well, what loads are going to be aggravating potential conditions in the foot? And let's say we'll go back to that easy example, the second metatarsal hem. That's more that compressive load. So can a foot orthotic benefit that? Well, I think if I aim to reduce some of that compressive load, I should make it feel better. And how can I do that? Well, if I increase the force around it, it's going to reduce how much compression's on there and also how much time they spend on there. And that's why, if you're a physiotherapist working with the foot and the ankle and you don't have metatarsal domes or metatarsal pads in your clinic, you need to get them in, because you just stick that on the shoe, you just stick that on the sole, you increase the force behind the sore spot. So when they push off, they're still going to have some force there, but certainly not as much. So it's a simple, easy thing to do. So rather than saying the particular pathology, it's about the load. So we talk about the frontal plane. I guess the frontal plane pathologies, frontal plane being inversion and eversion. If someone has a tibialis posterior tendinopathy, we know at mid-stance they're going to pronate at a certain degree or I guess velocity, and they're going to get to a certain degree of range of motion. And I know that foot's pronating. So if I think, okay, that pronation is going to be elongating the tendon, and similar to like the Achilles, it's going to be applying some tensile force, a little bit of compressive force in through the tarsal tunnel. Will the foot orthotic benefit that? I put my biomechanical hat on, and this is what I dream of when I go to bed. And I think, well, a foot orthotic can provide a supinatory force with the arch contour and the post at the back. So if I provide a supinatory force, I should be able to, in theory, quotation marks, reduce the amount of pronation velocity and potentially end range. And that should, in theory, make the tibialis posterior tendon feel better. And the same thing obviously goes for the peroneal tendon on the outside. So I kind of divide the foot of medial and lateral. I think, well, you've got pain on the outside, really, really simple. I'm just going to build up the outside as much as I can. So when you hit the ground, all your force is distributed onto the inside. And the same would be said, for the outside, to make it sound a bit simple. Now, if I take that to, say, the Achilles tendon, and I've seen a lot of Achilles. Probably one or two foot orthotics are prescribed for an Achilles tendon. It grinds my gears. Like, people with Achilles tendinopathy, rarely, maybe 1 in 1,000, if it's really unique and things like that. But for an Achilles tendon, well, what can a foot orthotic do for an Achilles tendon? Is it going to increase the supinatory and pronatory force? It definitely will, but that's not the force that aggravates an Achilles. It's more that tension and compression. So it's not going to change that dorsiflexion angle very much, or more superior than just a simple heel lift and a shoe with a high drop and a rocker. So in that case, it wouldn't be superior, and I certainly wouldn't prescribe that. But for the other ones, of course I would. So I think it's better to understand the loads, and then you can better understand what's going to be more appropriate.
Got it. Okay. And then for plantar heel pain as well, typically a heel cup would work pretty well. But you also mentioned trying to reduce that strain, right, on the bottom.
Yeah, I'm not a heel cup fan. I'm anti heel cup, which the reason for that is the material of the heel cup. There's something. It's like a plastic. Like, it doesn't seem to dampen the force that much. And we've got some really cool research, again, more in the diabetic world, where even just putting a flat sole of Poron that's 3.2 mil reduces the average peak pressure by up to 32% over the whole foot. So if you're a physio or someone listening to this, you can just cut a bit of material. Obviously, you charge that's consumable, and you just stick it in someone's shoe with a simple heel raise and a nice cushioned shoe. That's going to make their heel feel so much better, because the two types that I see in the clinic, the more compression one, where people land on the heel, and that's what aggravates them, versus more the tensile one when they're pushing off, when it's pulling on the plantar fascia band. So I find, and this is a gripe to take one for the podiatrist and harp on the physios here, a second opinion, or people will send to me, people have a compressive plantar heel pain where it's more aggravated to that compressive load, and a physio or another practitioner has rehabbed the heck out of this thing, and it's just not getting better. And it just needs a cuddle. It just needs a little bit of soft cushioning and some low dye taping and a nice cushion chew. A nice cushion chew, and to try and dampen that load, because that's obviously a very hard load, really hard load to reduce. So in that case, I would say for anyone that's using a heel cup, log online, look up Form Orthotics, look up a nice soft sole, because that also has a nice heel counter, and you can stick a little bit of foam on there and you're good to go. And because with that, you also have the arch. If you bring the ground up to the foot and increase the pressure in the arch, you're then going to reduce some of the pressure on the heel. Not a whole lot, but a little bit.
Do you have a guide, Blake, for people to access of maybe some materials that they can get? And if it's not a formal thing, would it be possible for you to send that to me and I could put it in the show notes?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just put my number and people just call me and we'll just have a yarn. Call me anytime. I'd love to talk about orthotics. I don't, but I have a post, and I could very easily, I've got some stuff I use for the uni about like just different properties of material. And it's easy to think like, you have your standard, say a Nike Converse. If you compare that sole versus, give you an example, like you would have seen the marathon shoes. This is the ASIC Metaspeed. They use a really high performance foam in there that's really absorbent, that returns a lot of energy. It's a whole nother conversation, but we're using that foam on top of our foot orthotics. And what that does is it just dampens some of the force. And you compare that to, say, like a Converse, which is really quite firm. I mean, you talk to anyone with plantar fasciitis, what's the one thing that they hate? Walking around at home on hard floorboards. And you add a little bit of cushion and it's like, hey, I feel a little bit better. So we just try and bring that up a little bit more, so they're a bit more comfortable. And then once they're back to normal, we take those things away.
Got it. Well, I can't make this up. I have to go because I'm about to see a patient. Initial assessment, they're complaining of a sudden heel pain, and they say that their orthotics aren't working. So,
they go, oh, my knee's sore. You go, are you sure you don't have any heel pain? I need to tell you about these foot orthotics.
So if you have an initial assessment, they're complaining of sudden heel pain, Blake, and they say that their orthotic isn't working. What are you thinking? I got to rely on you a little bit. You could do the initial.
Your orthotic's not working. I mean, the joke is, when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. And as musculoskeletal podiatrists, we're doing all the things that you guys have been doing for years. We're doing the rehab, we're doing the return to run planning, and that's kind of how we think and help people, get better. So maybe previously, if we just did foot orthotics, everyone comes in, hey, what would you prescribe a foot orthotic for if they have pain? Or maybe they don't have pain, we just give it to everyone. But now we're a little bit more selective and we've got a better understanding potentially of our prescription, but how that's working. I mean, it's the same for saying, how does exercise help with pain? We know that it helps somehow, and there's a lot of proposed mechanisms, but it's a hard question.
Yeah. All right, Blake. Yep. Well, I think I learned a ton here. I really, really appreciate it. I think I have a lot to learn in this space, and I'd love to have you on again sometime if you wouldn't mind coming back on.
Yeah, definitely. I know I knew this would happen. I know we had some questions to get to, and I was like doing the is it Rocky Balboa? Whoever it is, where he's like practicing in the mirror before he goes out on stage, and I didn't even get to rehearse some of them, so we'll definitely have to do another episode.
That's all right. Honestly, I think we got to a lot of them indirectly anyway. I think we did accomplish quite a bit. And again, I learned a lot, and I'm sure a lot of other physios did as well. So thank you, Blake, for joining me.
No, thank you so much.